Last month, my world shattered in a way I never thought possible. I lost my wife, my partner, my best friend. I still can't believe it. As I sit here writing this, the disbelief lingers, thick in the air. It feels like she's still here with me, like any moment now, I'll wake up from this nightmare and everything will be normal again. But it isn't, and it won't be. That call, that fateful video call from my 7-year-old son, wasn't the usual. It came out of nowhere, in the middle of a quiet afternoon on a Wednesday, while I was still at work. The name that flashed on my phone was his iPad dialing me. When I answered, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. There he was, standing there, looking at me with a grim expression. My heart skipped a beat. I asked, "What's wrong, buddy?" And the words he said next filled me with dread. "Something's wrong with Mommy." Panic shot through me, and I quickly told him to give the phone to her. He walked towards the living room, the camera still on him, and as he turned it, I saw her. My wife. She was half slumped on the sofa, her head lolling sideways. My breath caught in my throat. "What's happening?" I called out her name, desperately hoping she'd respond. My son started to shake her, but she didn't move. She just slumped over further. My oldest son tried to hold her head up, his voice trembling. "Something's wrong. She's too cold." It was like the world had stopped. She wasn't responding. Her skin had an ashen pallor, and my heart pounded in my chest, every beat more frantic than the last. There was no time to waste. I shouted her name again, adrenaline surging through me as I dashed out of the office, barely able to think straight. My mind was screaming, "No, not like this. Not her." Our plan had always been to head to a neighbor's house in case of emergencies. And now, without a second thought, I told the boys to run next door, promising I'd call right back. I dialed 911, relaying our location, explaining what little I knew. My workplace was about 25 minutes away, but the drive felt like an eternity, each second dragging on like it could stretch into forever. Strangely, in some ways, it felt too fast, too short. I called the boys again, and they picked up, knocking on the neighbor's door. Luckily, they were home. I could hear them explaining the situation, their words jumbled with fear. And then, my son's voice came back through the phone, his words jarring. "The police are here." With every minute that passed, I was growing more desperate. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it in my bones, the sense of something being too late. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor, not caring about the speed limit. 15 more minutes. 15 minutes before I could see what had happened to her. I pulled into the driveway. The sight before me nearly made me collapse. My sons were talking to officers in the yard. Neighbors stood off to the side, their faces pale with distress. 2 ambulances, a whole fleet of police cars. My heart twisted as I moved toward the scene. My neighbors rushed to me, trying to explain, but I couldn't focus on their words. I could only think of one thing, her. I walked slowly, almost in a trance, toward the first paramedic I could find. I had to know, was everything okay? His answer crushed me. "I'm sorry. She's too far gone. There's nothing we could do." Those words, said with such finality, echoed in my mind. I couldn't process them. Her lifeless body, her absence, it left me numb. I couldn't speak. My legs gave way, and I collapsed beside her, cradling her head in my hands, refusing to accept the truth. I wanted to scream, to shout at the world for taking her away from me. But all I could do was hold her, my body shaking with a grief too raw for words. Around me, the world seemed to continue, but I was frozen in place, in time. The paramedics told me there was no sign of foul play. They asked about her health, and I told them about the headaches she had been battling. Migraines, we thought. Maybe they were more than that. They assured me we'd know soon enough, but it didn't help. Nothing could help. After they took her away, the boys came to me, their eyes wide with confusion and horror. They told me how they found her on the sofa, thinking she was just sleeping. They'd gone outside to play and come back to find her unmoving. They couldn't wake her. And so, they had walked around her, unsure, for what felt like forever. I couldn't bear it. The fact that my boys had to see her like that, had to feel that fear, I couldn't even find words. I just hugged them, and we all cried. It didn't seem real. It couldn't be. But it was. Later, when the tears had subsided, I knew there was something I had to do. I needed to call my in-laws. They had to know. But the thought of telling them, especially after everything that had happened, made my stomach turn. My wife had been estranged from her parents for a long time. It wasn't something I liked to think about, but it was the truth. The history between us wasn't easy. My upbringing had been different, much different from hers. I had come to this country when I was 6, and I knew struggle. My parents worked tirelessly, constantly making sacrifices to provide for me and my siblings. They dreamed of owning a house, but that was something they never saw realized. My dad passed away when I was just 17, and my mother lost her battle with cancer almost 3 years ago. On the other hand, my wife grew up with a life I could only dream of: private schools, designer clothes, and vacations to exotic places every year. While I was scrimping and saving for college, working part time jobs, she had everything handed to her. I don't hold that against her. She was brilliant and achieved everything through her own hard work. But it was hard not to feel the difference in our worlds. We met 6 years ago at the same company. We started in the same position right after graduation. And though we worked for the same company, my career took off faster, and soon I was earning more than her. It gave me the opportunity to pay off my student loans and, eventually, save for a house, something I had always promised my parents I would do. When I was ready to start a family, I proposed to her. We were thrilled. The weekend after, we met her parents to share the good news. To my surprise, they gave us a house for our wedding gift. My wife was ecstatic. But the details came with a catch. The house would be in her name only, and they wanted us to sign a prenup. I felt insulted. My earnings had always been far greater than hers, and our financial approach was always equal, even after marriage. But they didn't see it that way. They made it clear they didn't think I was good enough for their daughter. And that hurt. Should be cautious about our relationship. This was a blow to both of us, igniting a fire of resentment that could never be put out. Despite my wife's persistent attempts to defend us, her parents remained relentless. Their demands were suffocating, their words sharp as daggers. With frustration mounting, my wife made an ultimatum. No more gifts from them. We'll buy our own home, she declared. And I stood by her. But this decision seemed to deepen the rift. Their voices grew louder, accusations slashing through the air. They blamed me, suggesting that I had intentionally sabotaged their daughter's life by refusing to sign that prenup. The tension reached a boiling point. And despite our attempts to calm the storm, the hostility was palpable. The insults kept coming, each one colder than the last. There was no reasoning with them. With no other choice, we walked out, leaving behind the chaos and their bitter words. Since that moment, we'd had no contact. My wife had insisted on a no-contact policy, a boundary that only grew more necessary as the years passed. The strain of our differences made reconciliation impossible. Years went by, and life moved on. We bought our house, raised two beautiful sons, but now, with my wife gone, I had no choice but to reach out to her parents. The news hit them like a sledgehammer. When I told my mother-in-law, she refused to believe it at first. The disbelief in her voice was quickly replaced by a tirade of blame. "You killed her," she screamed, her words stabbing at me. "I'll make you pay for this." I never expected her to comfort me, but this level of hostility, at this moment, caught me off guard. I tried to call my father-in-law, but he didn't answer. I hoped that my mother-in-law would break the news to him. The next day, they arrived, unannounced. Standing at my doorstep, they began yelling. The venom in their words was suffocating. "You killed her," they cried, their voices rising with each accusation. "You'll never be forgiven." My sons, confused, terrified, looked up at them, their faces a mix of shock and fear. It broke me to see them like that. I tried to keep the peace, to calm them down, but nothing would stop the onslaught. In that moment, the only thing left for me to do was call the police. When they arrived, my in-laws rushed to accuse me of murder. The officers, puzzled by their accusations, listened to my side. I explained how my sons had found her, how we had called for help immediately. The officers questioned the boys, who answered truthfully, and then tried to reason with my in-laws. They were informed that there was nothing they could do until the toxicology report came back, and that they needed to wait for the results. The officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, but I declined. I just wanted them gone so that my sons and I could grieve in peace. Days later, I received a call from the doctor with the autopsy results. It was a brain clot, a silent killer, a blood clot that blocked her brain. The doctor told me there had been nothing that could have been done. It was an unexpected tragedy, one that no one could have seen coming. I called my in-laws to inform them of the results, hoping that this might bring some sense of clarity. At first, they seemed calmer, their voices quieter. Maybe, just maybe, they would see reason. But the next battle was just beginning. The funeral. My wife had never made specific plans for her death, but I remembered one conversation we had. Last year at a funeral, she had mentioned how she'd prefer an outdoor ceremony, something more peaceful and personal, surrounded by nature. So I suggested a simple outdoor service in our backyard, among the flowers and trees she had lovingly tended to for years. It seemed like the perfect way to honor her love for the outdoors, something she had always cherished. But my in-laws were adamant. They wanted a traditional funeral, at the church, as dictated by their religious customs. They refused to consider her wishes. I stood firm, unwilling to bend. I explained that this was how she would have wanted it, and I was determined to honor her wishes. She wasn't religious, and I wasn't about to let them impose their traditions on her memory. This infuriated them. My mother-in-law told me I had no right to dictate her daughter's funeral. You should have left her alone, my father-in-law yelled, accusing me of never truly loving her, and even suggesting I had killed her for the life insurance money. The pain of those words was unbearable. It wasn't true. We were happy. We were a family. There was no tension, no hidden agenda. I assured them that whatever had happened to her was completely unexpected and certainly had nothing to do with any problems in our marriage. But nothing seemed to appease them. As the days dragged on, they continued to argue with me about the most trivial things: the music, the guest list, the coffin. They didn't want certain people to attend, people they no longer spoke to. But I refused. This was my wife's funeral. Her friends, her family, everyone who wanted to say goodbye deserved to be there. I wasn't going to let their bitterness ruin that. The day of the service arrived. A part of me just wanted it over, but another part of me feared how I would handle it. My sons gave me strength, but the pain was suffocating. So many people came. It was heartwarming to see how loved she was, how many lives she had touched. But I couldn't escape the feeling of helplessness that gnawed at me. As friends cleaned my house and offered their support, I was overwhelmed. The smallest thing, a random object, a song, would send me into a spiral of uncontrollable tears. I had to ask my friends if this was all a dream. But the heartbreak in my chest told me it was real. After the funeral, I found myself lying on our bed, surrounded by my wife's things: her clothes, her jewelry, her phone, buzzing with spam messages, a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. I broke down. I couldn't breathe. A few days later, I had to meet with the lawyer to go over my wife's will. When they read through the document, it became clear. Everything she had was left to me. My in-laws, already on edge, completely lost control. They accused me of killing their daughter for the money, calling me a gold digger. Their words cut deeper than anything I had ever imagined. The grief I was already carrying, the pain of losing my wife, was now compounded by their baseless accusations. They honestly believed that if she hadn't married me, she would still be alive. They thought our life together had caused her death. I understood that their grief clouded their judgment, but that didn't make it any easier. I loved her too. I told them firmly that it wasn't fair for them to blame me. I didn't deserve this. I had nothing to gain. I wasn't going to sit there and let them continue attacking me. I made it clear that they were welcome to contact me once they had calmed down and realized how utterly ridiculous and unfounded their accusations were. The tension in the air thickened as my in-laws began questioning me about the house. Their eyes never left me as they demanded answers, each inquiry sharper than the last. Who would the house go to? Their voices echoed with frustration, but I stood my ground, offering them nothing but a blank stare in return. The house was purchased with both my wife's and my own money, I explained calmly. So naturally it stays with me. They didn't accept this answer. They pressed on, their accusations louder and more insistent, claiming there was no way I could afford it. Then they issued an ultimatum, demanding I sign the house over to them. I felt a surge of anger but refused to let it show. No, I said firmly, my voice unyielding. This is ridiculous. I'm not signing over our house. It's mine and my wife's. You can't just threaten to take my kids from me. My eyes locked with theirs. The weight of my words hung between us. I'm their father, and they will stay with me. A flash of rage crossed their faces, but I didn't flinch. Their threats only seemed to fuel their fury, and their glares burned into me. I knew I had to stay calm, to keep my composure. I won't continue this conversation under these circumstances, I said, my voice colder now. We need some space. Time to think about what you're asking. Without waiting for their response, I turned on my heel and left the room, needing distance to calm the fire that was rapidly growing in my chest. A week later, the storm hit again. A letter arrived from my late wife's estranged parents. It demanded that I sign the house over to them, or they would take legal action. They claimed that, as the grandparents, they had the right to raise my children in the house their daughter had loved. I was shaken. How could they be doing this? I was already grieving, and now this. I consulted with my lawyer, who assured me that legally, they had no claim. Still, the emotional weight of the threat was crushing. I felt the walls closing in on me. The house my wife and I had built together, where our children had grown, was now being ripped from my hands by the very people who had never been there for my family. My heart ached for my boys. They had already lost so much. How could I protect them from this too? I didn't know how to navigate this. The idea of losing our home, the place where my children had lived their entire lives, seemed unbearable. It was all I had left of my wife. I considered offering shared custody, but I couldn't fathom what that would mean for my boys. We had no place else to go. Had any of you been through something like this? How did you handle it? Was I wrong to resist? Was I unknowingly at fault for their extreme reaction? I was desperate for advice, for support, or at least for someone to tell me I wasn't alone in this nightmare. Update 1. Hey Reddit, I want to thank all of you for the overwhelming support and advice after my first post. It's been a difficult journey since my wife passed, and things with my in-laws have only gotten worse. After receiving their letter, I followed my lawyer's advice: no direct communication with them. Instead, I focused on my children, ensuring they had a stable, loving environment during this turmoil. In the meantime, my lawyer sent a response to their legal threats, outlining exactly why their demands had no legal basis. Now we wait for their reply. It's a stressful time, but I'm doing my best to stay strong for my boys. Update 2. It's been 4 months since my last update. I have some significant news to share. I couldn't update sooner because the legal proceedings had to be resolved first. After some back and forth, it was clear my in-laws were intent on taking legal action. The case went to court, and I found myself facing them again. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. My lawyer had prepared an airtight defense, laying out the facts. We presented evidence showing the house was purchased solely by my wife and me, without any assistance from them. The judge wanted concrete proof, and my in-laws couldn't provide it. Their lawyer relied on emotional arguments, but the judge wasn't moved. He asked for documentation, and their case crumbled. The judge's decision was a huge relief. He ruled in my favor, acknowledging the house belonged to me, and reprimanded my in-laws for trying to manipulate the situation. He made it clear that trying to take my children away, especially after they had already lost one parent, was utterly unfounded. Though the legal battle ended in my favor, the pain of losing my wife hasn't eased. I still grieve for her every day. My boys miss her desperately, asking why she had to leave and wishing she was still here. Watching them hurt like that breaks me. I try to console them, but it feels like there are no words that will ever be enough. Through it all, my friends have been a lifeline. They've helped us in practical ways, but more than that, they've been there emotionally. They understand what my sons are going through and do whatever they can to make things easier. Their support has been invaluable. Thank you, everyone, for your kind words and advice. As I continue this journey, I'll keep you all updated on any changes. The legal battle is over, but the road to healing is just beginning. Update 3. Life with my boys has started to find some rhythm. We've established new routines, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure they grow up in a loving, supportive home. We've found some sense of peace, even amidst all the chaos. One of the biggest reliefs is that my in-laws haven't caused us any more trouble since the court ruling. Their defeat seems to have quieted them, at least for now. I've also made sure they can't contact us. I've blocked them everywhere, and if they ever show up at my door again, I'll call the police without hesitation. The boys are adjusting as best they can. We've sought professional help to guide them through their grief, and while it's a difficult journey, I'm committed to seeing them through it. As for me, the healing process continues. The void my wife left will never truly be filled, but I'm learning to navigate this new chapter with resilience. Thank you all for being a part of our journey.